Hello and welcome back to How to Art. So last week we looked at making our own stories. If you haven't seen last week's video or got a story yet for your comic, I strongly suggest watching last week's video before watching this one. Unless of course you were just watching for fun and enjoy these videos, in which case have fun. So today we are going to look at something called transitioning. This is how your comic goes from frame to frame. The way I think of it is the first frame shows the start of something and the next frame shows the end of something. Depending on how much happens in between each frame depends on which transition you use. Now it is very important to find the right balance between your transitions, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. Scott McCloud categorizes the transitions in the following way: moment to moment, action to action, subject to subject, scene to scene, aspect to aspect, and then non sequiturs. I do like this model and I think it is a good way of understanding comics, but I don't think you should really focus on it as a template for your transitions. The reason is that all comics are different and all stories are different, and you cannot plan a story around transitioning. Transitioning is something that can be moulded around your story. Well, I'm going to go into a bit of detail about the different transitions now so you get a better understanding. Moment to moment is a very small difference in timing. You can use this to really focus on something subtle if you think it will work. A good example is showing someone's facial expression change, or to reveal something slowly to build up suspense, like maybe someone's hand is opening really slowly. Generally, you're not going to want too many of these transitions because too many will make progress in your comic so slow. The next you have is action to action. If you have an action-based comic, you will want a lot of action to action transitions. No surprise there. This represents an action. Again, no surprise there. So maybe your character pulls his arm back in a fist and next frame shows a villain getting a dry slap across the chops. This is really good if you want to show a sequence of stuff happening. Subject to subject is more of a start and end of an action, so rather than having a man pull a punch and hit someone, and then duck as the villain throws his punch, and then he jumps and next thing you know he's kicking him, you could just skip that and have the hero throw a punch and next frame shows an unconscious villain. You have scene to scene. If you want to leave your current setup to progress the story, you aren't going to draw several subject to subject frames of your character walking across the road to meet their friends in the cafe. A lot of that is redundant. Remember what I said last week? If it doesn't aid your story in any way, don't include it. So, scene to scene could be your hero at home on the phone saying, "Sure, I'll be there," and next scene you'll have him sitting at a table with his friends drinking Ovaltine. Aspect to aspect is a bit different. This shows two things somewhere that are related, but there isn't a time element to it. This is usually done to set up a scene. What I like to do is have a big scene image and some sub-images inside it with various activities occurring. In this example in front of you, this is actually something I drew up from my comic, and as you can see we've got a nice little sort of cul-de-sac sort of road of some houses, and we've got some sub-images here, and we've got a man mowing his lawn, we've got a lady gardening over here, and then over here we've got some birds chirping. Now this image doesn't have a timeline. All three could be occurring concurrently. They could be happening one at a time, one after the other. It's ambiguous, but it just sets up a scene. Now the Japanese, if you look at a lot of Japanese comics, also known as manga, they use a lot of aspect in there to set up a scene, and I personally like this very much, as it means your audience has a better understanding of what's going on, so it sort of sets up the scene for the audience. Last type of transition is something called a non sequitur. Now if you have no idea what that means, don't worry. People that use these tend to already incorporate them into their stories before they've even mapped out their script. And this is where you have two images side by side that have no relation to one another whatsoever. So Garth Ennis, who wrote The Boys and Preacher, he in Preacher, spoiler alert, throughout the comic there's a random story appearing of a cowboy going through a town in the past. Now despite the comic being set in modern day, it is later revealed why this is occurring, the significance of this, but a non sequitur is used by the author of a story to set up a dramatic reveal or a mystery throughout the book. Generally though, you're not going to want to use too many of these. A good rule of thumb, you want to focus most of your frames to be around action to action or subject to subject. Pretty much all comics follow this structure, as this allows the story to take the most efficient path. You don't need to stick to this religiously. I don't want any of you compromising your stories and having a conversation fit entirely in one frame, saturating the faces of your characters just so you can include a scene to scene frame in there. It's just a template. Obviously, if your story is more about travelling, then you will have more to scene and aspect to aspect transitions than action to action, for example. Or if you're doing like a really sort of bullet time, sort of time-lapse fighting or action comic, then you're going to have more moment to moment and action to action sort of frames in there as well. There's hardly any moment to moment transitions in a comic. Is think about how long it would take to read if you had a whole story and there were 7 frames showing a character blinking. The reason there's hardly any non sequiturs is because, well, okay, so I've got a little drawing I've done here. Now this is a story. Now I'm going to give you 5 seconds and I want you to work it out. Ready? Do 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 do. Did you get it? Probably not. This is about a young child builds a home out of Lego, as we can see here, and after that he then goes with his parents, and when they're out shopping he notices in the shop window a new toys which his parents buy him. Now they also notice that the toy shop has a little playpen, so they go into, let him off into the playpen, or they go into a cafe and have a cup of coffee and have a little break because they've been shopping for half an hour. After they've done that, they then decide that as a treat they will pop next door and check out the local modern art gallery. Now none of that you would have worked out because it all looks so bland. Yeah, my drawings ain't great, but you know, these are just me sort of rushing. I can draw better, you've seen some of my work. And with this though, individually, if these had the relevant frames to go side by side to them, it would make a lot more sense, and you would really sort of understand where the story was going. And to be honest with you, it's a bit of a dull story, but I just made it up on the spot. But you can see with non sequiturs, maybe skipping from one to the other has its place. But generally, you don't want to be lazy. You want to do your frames by frames. You want it to tell the story. It's not about getting to the finish line, it's about the journey. Personally, I disagree with using the transition structure this way. This is because all comics, authors and stories are completely different and they all have their own structure. As long as you've written a good enough story, the transitions should fit themselves in around your comic without you having to spend too much time thinking about it. The reason I explained it in this detail is it is important to understand the transitioning. I also disagree that they can all be categorized as well, such as when does a punch become a subject to subject rather than an action to action and so on. And obviously you have ambiguous aspect to aspect, at which point is it now a non sequitur? You don't know, but it does serve its purpose, and it does allow you to sort of see the generic structure of things, because comics do change how fast things go from one to the other. It does mean your transitions are more time-lapse linear, but it does serve a good purpose. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I put a lot of work into my videos, and this one I've tried new things. You may have noticed more of my transitionings and editing skills, excuse the pun. You haven't got any homework today, you'll be pleased to know. I just want you to understand transitions, and this is going to be needed for next week when we make our script. Anyway, let me know what sort of transitions you think your comic's going to focus on in the comments below. It'll be interesting to see how that sort of caters with the graphs that are all the same on the things. And I'd love to know what you think. So don't forget, like and subscribe.